So, let's see, I would like to call this meeting to order at 7 p.m. on March 24th. Welcome to the March 24th, 2022 electronic meeting of the Environmental Commission. This meeting is in accordance with executive orders from the governor to effect social distancing and mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus. We intend to conduct this meeting similarly to an in-person meeting. However, please be patient if there are technical issues. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID 989-2851-1637. Again, this is meeting ID number 989-285-11637. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city website and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16, AT&T channel 99, and online at www.a2gov.org/watchctn. So, Galen, would you please read the land heritage statement and then do the roll call?
Sure. All right. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including Ottawa, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained generally in unconscionable ways from indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals. That's the land heritage statement.
Thanks, Galen. Would you like to initiate the roll call?
Sure. Commissioner Needham. Commissioner Needham. Councilmember Dish.
Present.
Commissioner Graham. Commissioner Graham.
I'm here, sorry.
Councilmember Griswold.
Here.
Commissioner Collywart.
Here.
Chairperson Brown.
Present in Ann Arbor.
Vice Chairperson Mitchell.
Present in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Vandenbroek.
Here.
Commissioner Oriole. Commissioner Oriole. Commissioner Zhang.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Gibb Randall.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Marston.
I'm here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Gruber. Commissioner Gruber. Commissioner Niedrich.
Present.
Commissioner Juneau.
Here in Ann Arbor.
All right, we have a quorum.
All right, thank you, Galen. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Are there any, let's see, is there a motion to accept it? Kathy, is there a second? Shannon, or Chris, any discussion? The floor is open for discussion. I hear and see none, no requests for discussion. So all who approve the agenda as submitted, please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any, any no votes? I see and hear none. Any abstentions? I see and hear none. So the agenda as submitted is approved unanimously. So we'll follow. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of our February meeting. Let's see. Do I have a motion to Rita? Do I have a second? Kathy,
hold on.
we're open for discussion.
Just a quick correction in our last minutes, and I apologize for not noting this earlier, but Commissioner Juneau was not present, so we should just add that to the minutes. Minor modification.
Say that again, Commissioner who?
Commissioner Juneau,
Okay. Mhm.
and I think it's just not noted.
She wasn't on the Legistar for last month.
Right. Yeah.
Well, sorry about that. So that's that seems like a friendly amendment, minor modification. Would all who approve of the minutes as amended, raise your hands or say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any no votes? Any abstentions? Okay, the minutes of the February meeting are approved with that one modification. That Edith Juneau will be registered as absent from the meeting. So, okay, the next item on the agenda is public commentary. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 1-888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 989-2851-1637. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments, and be patient. There is a delay of up to 30 seconds before a connection is established. So while we're waiting, I guess Michael Cost has his presentation and he can control it. So we should probably I'll allow him to share his screen during his presentation. Galen.
Would you like me to do that now?
Let's wait until the public commentary period is finished. But you will need to submit a PDF copy of your presentation to Galen Hardy after the meeting, as soon after the meeting as possible, so that we can post it on Legistar.
So a brief introduction of Michael, if I can do that while we're waiting.
Well, let's see, 30 seconds, we're almost up here. So let's conclude the public commentary period. Galen, is anybody on the line?
No, no callers.
Okay. Well, this ends the first public commentary period. The next period will be near the end of the meeting. So the next opportunity to give public commentary. So yes. Okay. Okay. Go ahead, Chris.
So Michael Cost is a botanist and a longtime employee of one of my favorite organizations in Michigan called the Michigan Natural Features Inventory, which was begun in the 1970s to and initially funded by the Nature Conservancy, although housed in the Department of Natural Resources in Lansing, to do inventory work of the natural features of Michigan. And they have been extraordinarily successful. Among the many things they had to figure out were the natural or native plant communities of the state from top to bottom. Michael, you'll have to tell us how many there are, but dozens, and some of them are quite rare. He co-authored this book, A Guide to the Natural Communities of Michigan, along with a couple of other members of the Natural Features Inventory. He currently serves as a curator of the native plants of the Mathai Botanical Gardens and Nichols Arboretum. He's a consultant in private business, and I invited him to come speak to you about native forest fragments, which is something called out 20 years ago in our natural features amendments to our city code, but with which we've done very little since. It's high priority of the Natural Features Committee to do a lot more about them in our city. Michael?
Okay, so thanks for that introduction, Chris. Can everybody hear me okay? Host says, okay, the host has disabled screen sharing, so host disabled. So I just need to share my screen. So if you can give me, make me a co-host, that's usually how it works, so that I can share my screen. There we go, thank you. Okay, so yes, I serve as an associate curator at the Botanical Gardens in Nichols Arboretum, and I teach in the School of Environment and Sustainability a course on ecology and botany. And as Chris mentioned, a lot of the work I'll be talking about today, a lot of the stuff is in a series of publications. I've got 80 some odd publications. 5 books on the natural communities of Michigan with my co-authors. This in the upper, I think it's your upper left-hand corner, you'll see this is a 300-page publication that's downloadable describing each of the natural communities. And one of the other key things that I've done in my career is I've done a lot of workshops for professionals. So contracted with the DNR for about 15 years, running workshops for them on biodiversity and various aspects of land management. So my office for 15 years was housed in the wildlife department, working for the Nature Conservancy and TNC, and MSU, but housed with the biologists in the DNR. The other agency we worked really close with, again, doing workshops for their staff, was the Department of Environmental Quality, and also doing workshops for wetland consultants. So that's what my career has been, essentially advising on land management and biodiversity conservation, trying to understand what we have out there, what's important to protect. Of everything that's out there, where do we focus? So that's what Michigan Natural Features does. That's what I did for many years, and I continue to do that work today, as well as teach. So let me move on. So to start with, I want to take a look at the state of Michigan, at least the Lower Peninsula, and focus your attention on a couple different things. One is that these lighter color areas in the north are savanna types or barrens types mixed with pine and oak. And this line between the green, various colors of green, which are mainly sugar maple, sometimes mixed with hemlock and white pine, this is a shifting mosaic depending on fire frequency historically. And in southern Michigan, we have these oak hickory forests in the brighter pink and oak savannas in several shades of this tan color, along with mixed oak forest in this darker green. So, and that line between savanna and prairie was constantly shifting depending on the how frequent fire was. And fire really was dependent on the abundance of, the populations of Native Americans. Certainly there were lots of lightning strikes, and obviously there were no roads to put them out, no plowed field to put them out. So when the fires moved, with the wind, they moved for long distances. But as we all know, there was a 95% reduction in the population of Native Americans following DeSoto entering Florida in the 1500s that swept across both the North America and South America. And so the populations fluctuated, and with that, this shifting mosaic, this line of forest versus prairie or savanna. As we zoom into Washtenaw County, this is that same map, and this is Ann Arbor, and what you see is the mixed oak forest, a white oak, black oak forest predominantly, surrounded by an oak hickory forest, but bordered again by this oak barrens. These are oak barrens, these are oak openings. So historically documented in the about 1830s to 1857. And during that time, 1837 to about 1857, the state was laid out. So populations of Native Americans were much reduced, and there was probably an overrepresentation of forest as compared to what it would have been even 100 years earlier, and certainly several hundred years earlier, because the diseases and then the wars and persecution that Native Americans suffered under during this time. So I want to read you a couple of historical quotes that are taken out of Kim Chapman's thesis, one of the early ecologists at Michigan Natural Features Inventory, where I served as an ecologist and the lead ecologist for 15 years. So the roads in the openings and plains offer to the traveler a variety of routes. With the choice of diverging at pleasure, the scattered oaks leaving sufficient space between for the passage of horses and carriages, while the prairie is one of wide, unbounded highway where no obstacle is present for pursuing whichever course curiosity may direct. Written in 1840. In July of the same year, and I think that says 1831 or 51. I have a little, my screen sharing is in front of that. Simon Mills made the journey in a lumber wagon drawn by horses through the unbroken wilderness from Ann Arbor to Gull Prairie near Richmond, Kalamazoo County. This journey was through the oak openings. They did not find 1/2 mile of timbered land on the whole route. So this term oak openings was used in place of, we typically use the word oak savanna today, scattered grassland with scattered oaks, or small groves of oak trees and scattered oaks in a grassland opening, in a prairie opening. But historically, that term oak openings was used in the surveyor notes and in the past, and that's what we've chosen to call it in our classification of natural communities. So here's another one that's where the conversion of open prairie to forest was well underway by 1872, when Hubbard described the landscape near Pontiac as it appeared during his earlier 1837 expedition with Douglas Houghton through Michigan's new territory. The surrounding country seemed to our eyes far enough removed from the gloomy morass surrounding Detroit, which wild imagination had depicted it 20 years before. It appeared to me the most beautiful the sun ever shone upon. It was of the character then beginning to be classed as openings, characterized by gravelly soil and a sparse growth of oaks and hickories. I speak in the past tense because though the rural beauty of the country is still unrivaled, little remains of the original character of the openings. This is a result partly of the progress of cultivation and partly of the thick growth of small timber that has covered all the uncultivated portions since the annual fires have ceased, which kept down the underbrush. So by 1837, the land had changed quite a bit to be dominated by trees. There's another one. We left Detroit on a railroad. Our road lay among the openings. much of the way, and we found them undergoing the changes which are incident of the passage of civilized man, as the periodical fires had now ceased for many years. Underbrush was growing in lieu of the natural grass. And in so much as these groves are less attractive than formerly, but one easily comprehends the reason. And I'm going to show you in the next couple what he's talking about, what Cooper in 1884 is talking about. In 1881, while recalling Prairie Ronde and Gordonick, both in southwest Kalamazoo County, Brown utilizes. Early in March, the rank growth of last year's grass, dried by the sun and wind, was set on fire and the whole prairie burned over, leaving it bare and black as midnight. Then, in a few days, came the beautiful flowers, covering the whole prairie with one uniform color, first the blue-violet, then purple phlox, and this succeeded by some other color. And in July and August, a tall yellow flower, the name of which I do not know, mixed profusely with the tall grass, gave yellow as the predominating color. There's another one, 1884, describing the openings of Kalamazoo County. The annual fires burnt up the underwood, decayed trees, vegetation, and debris in the openings, leaving them clear of obstructions. You could see through the trees in any direction, save where the irregularity of the surface intervened, for miles around you, and you could walk, ride, or horseback, or drive in a wagon wherever you pleased in this woods, as freely as you could in a neat and beautiful park. Here in 1892, Glidden describes southern Michigan's oak forests in the following passage, or the origin of these forests. After the best job of breaking, meaning plowing, a live grub or oak grub, a live oak grub would be left upon every square rod of ground. There is nothing to compare with this pioneer grub. For 50 years or more, its yearly growth had been burned off and had sprouted again in the spring. The enlargement at the surface about the taproot increased with each year's growth of sprouts until the cap was formed, a foot or more in width, like an underground toadstool, although not so regular in shape. The whole undersurface of this cap was filled with dormant buds that awoke in activity at once when the standing ones were cut or were burned away. Nature reasserted itself when the annual burning had ceased, and the fittest stems survived and became the tree or young oak, and as we see them today, while the cap has rotted away. So those are, you can see, especially in those last 4 or so quotes, you can really get a sense of the importance of fire in shaping the landscape. Here is a map I produced back many years ago now, looking at the fire-dependent ecosystems, grouping all those savannas and prairies and all the associated open wetlands where fires moved across those and kept them open as well, grouping those all together to get a look at like how much land was fire-dependent. And what you can see is a big portion of southern Michigan where fires moved. This was the Prairie Peninsula moving in from across Illinois, Indiana into Michigan, moving across this fire-dependent landscape into these oak systems. And oak grubs, some of you know these, but I've had the pleasure of trying to remove some of these, and they're tough. This is a grub that resprouted following burning, so you can see the blackened soil and the small little leaves. These are shoots that were burned off, and they can be massive. But they resprout when released from fire. They just resprout, and that's a lot of what our forests are today. Our forests today, many of these forests were historically oak savannas of some form that quickly converted to prairie by the 1880s. Were prairie, and we use fire for many reasons. Land managers use fire to maintain biodiversity because it contributes at multiple levels. So fire was historically critically important. It still is critically important. That hasn't changed. So it's one of the tools we really land managers have to rely on And it does amazing things because it releases the nutrients that are stored in the dried plant materials: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium. These are all key nutrients that plants need to grow. And as it releases those, it increases the, and studies have been shown that the plants in burned areas contain more of those nutrients. And in doing so, they end up with higher rates of, we have higher seedling establishment because the duff has been cleared off and there's not competition, greater seedling establishment, greater seed germination establishment, greater flowering, greater seed set, greater biomass. And these openings create habitat for species that need openings. So the savannas, the prairies. So the fire certainly does that and helps structure the ecosystems in ways that shapes their pattern on the, shapes their arrangement on the landscape. In other words, you have a series of open wetlands, typically next to these oak systems, these oak barrens, oak forests. And in northern Michigan, it's the same thing, but with poor fens and bogs next to pine barrens and oak pine barrens and pine forests. So so you've heard me mention oaks several times, and they're important, and they're critically important. There's no doubt that they are keystone species. In other words, species that have a disproportionately greater effect on the abundance and distribution and diversity of other species. So oaks are just critically important. They support more caterpillar species than any other plant than any other genus in North America, the genus Quercus. And in Ann Arbor, oaks support over 450 species of caterpillars. At least that's what we've counted so far. I have a feeling that'll increase over time as we learn more. So it's more than any other species. In the mid-Atlantic region, they've documented on white oak over 550 caterpillar species. That's why I'm thinking it's probably even greater than 450. So acorns also provide critical food sources for over 100 vertebrate species, and thousands of species utilize oak tree, the oak, like the stems of the oak trees, the leaves, the snags, the coarse woody debris, the wood cavities, litter, and oaks are critical. So oaks are critical for maintaining biodiversity. Here you see a chickadee, and like many songbirds, about 95% of birds are insectivorous. They require, in North America, I think it's 96% of birds are insectivorous, except for the, if you exclude the seabirds, then 96% of the remaining birds are insectivorous, and they require insects to raise their young, and the majority of what they feed their young are these caterpillars from butterfly and moths. So just to raise a clutch of eggs can require 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars over that 21-day period. And they continue to feed their young caterpillars for 21 days following fledging when they leave the nest. So I'm going to be using the term biodiversity quite a bit. I just want to make sure we all understand what that term means. So it refers to the variety of life on Earth at all its levels, from genes to ecosystems, as well as the ecological processes that support it. So I know a lot of times we use the term biodiversity to mean species diversity, and that's fine. It does mean species diversity, but it also means ecosystem diversity. It means the different types and arrangements of ecosystems, the ecological processes that support that, as well as the life within those communities, within those natural communities, within those ecosystems. The quote, one of my favorite quotes in ecology is by Aldo Leopold. And he said, the first rule of intelligent tinkering is to keep all the parts. And that's as true then as when he wrote it as it is today, and I think will always be in ecology. If we're going to manage land, if we're going to take responsibility for a set of lands, be it a city, a state, or the nation, we really need to keep all the parts. So here you see a kestrel feeding its young a hawk moth, and below is a hawk moth pollinating or drawing nectar from a thistle, a native thistle, Cirsium discolor, that grows in our prairies and savannas in the ecosystem. We need all of this. We cannot have these kestrels if they don't have food. And in this case, hawk moths need plants. So they're all critical. We can't have any one of those. And just like most systems, whether it's your body or ecosystems, it's often the smallest things, the littlest critters. Like E.O. Wilson said, you know, it's the beware of these little guys, because the insects, because they really run the show at the end of the day. If you have a dysfunction in yourself, your mitochondria don't work, you're in big trouble, right? The smaller the smaller the critter, when that goes out, it affects everything up the trophic level. So the insects are critically important, not just to the birds, but to the rest of the ecosystem. And where do the insects get their food from? The plants. So while it all matters, each one of these clogs of the wheel, each one of these pieces is critically important to keep. Okay, so the Earth is experiencing massive losses in biodiversity, as you're well aware. There's been precipitous declines across taxa, from vertebrates and invertebrates. At Durzo coined defaunation, meaning, and the term Anthropocene is widely used today. So in other words, we're presently in the geologic period of the Holocene, but it's been reclassified, renamed by many people as Anthropocene. In other words, human beings are having the biggest effect on the planet right now. And the defaunization, meaning we're losing species like crazy. Plants, there's many citations I could listed, insects, birds, mammals, fish, amphibians, reptiles, all suffering great declines right now. And what you're looking at, this cool picture here, is a various species of goldenrod and many insects. Goldenrod support 135 species of caterpillars, in other words, from moths and butterflies, and hundreds of pollinators in the Ann Arbor area, including many specialists that are entirely dependent on goldenrod pollen and nectar. So the causes of biodiversity loss, the primary cause is habitat loss. For example, in Michigan, we've lost over 50% of our wetlands. That's on average. You can see it varies statewide. Invasive species are another major reason for habitat loss. Overexploitation, disease, pollution, pesticides, overpopulation, which obviously relates to habitat loss and some of these others. And probably more recently, maybe going back even 100 years now, but is climate change, and certainly coming to a head and speeding up. So biodiversity loss is a front and center, and those who manage the lands or are responsible for that have to keep this in mind, because you're stewarding so many species, and it's so critically important. Here we look at forest change in Michigan, and you can see from acres from that circa 1800 vegetation map to current, and this is about 10 years old now. Actually, it's more about 20 years old, to be honest with you. So, and there has been continuous loss during that time. But we've lost about 68% of our upland forest historically in southern Michigan, over 75% of our beech sugar maple forest, about 66% of our oak hickory forest. And when we get into the savannas and grasslands, we've lost over 99% of those. So from historic levels. So we've seen a lot of change, and that change comes with some serious costs and some serious responsibilities. Forest fragmentation is something I want to talk a little bit about. So what this refers to, and it could be habitat fragmentation. So fragmentation is often phrased as habitat fragmentation, and in forest systems we call it forest fragmentation. And what it involves is breaking a contiguous block of forest into smaller parcels, or a contiguous block of natural habitat into small parcels. And this occurs incrementally, typically. In other words, just like you see in that first picture up on top, it doesn't happen overnight. It's usually happens slow and steady, and the losses, the impacts are cumulative. You might start with a subdivision and then, build another segment to the subdivision, then another one. Pretty soon you have a vast area with just these fragments of forest. So this is a forest fragment. Here's a forest fragment. Here's another forest fragment. And then this picture, the forests are gone. You have grasslands or lawns where what's left of once was forest. So so before I address the downside of forest fragmentation, I want to talk about why there's a few reasons why they're important. First of all, they provide ecosystem services. For example, they produce oxygen, they reduce air pollution and greenhouse gases, they sequester carbon, slow global warming, reduce urban temperatures, prevent soil erosion, reduce runoff and water pollution, promote water infiltration, recharge groundwater stores, and I could go on. So all of these things are critically important, and we take every one of these for granted. You know, the urban heat island effect. Well, in other words, it's warmer. If you go to the countryside, you put a temperature probe in a city and one at the same latitude in a rural area. Well, it's always warmer in the city because there's that urban heat island effect, right? Well, guess what? Your forest fragments help reduce that, and they generate oxygen and reduce air pollution and sequester carbon. In other words, when they take in through photosynthesis, they take in those carbon atoms and put them into the trunk. And there was this, when I went to school, and I'm guessing it's probably still taught today, but it's false, the idea that small trees sequester more carbon, they take up more carbon, they grow quicker. Well, that's been debunked. It's been debunked in meta-analysis. It's been debunked in individual studies by engineers who know how to measure using very accurate measurements of tree rings. And the bigger trees actually grow faster in terms of the amount of wood they put on. While a small tree might grow from 1 inch to 10 inches in a short period of time, the big tree, it just takes a millimeter of growth or so. And you add up all those millimeters over a meter wide tree, over a 40-inch diameter tree, you've got a lot more area than a small tree. So large trees are critically important. So even though they might be perceived as not growing quickly, they're actually growing. They're actually putting on more bulk each year, more bulk than small trees. So they're critically important to protect. And I know many of you are like me. When you see an oak go down, you know, it just feels so bad when you see one of these big old trees. And we just have to remember that just because you're 80 doesn't mean, and the tree's 80 doesn't mean the tree is old. Just because you might be feeling old, the tree isn't old. Trees are indeterminate growth. As long as they don't get knocked down by wind or some disease, they can live. They can live hundreds of years. And that's really exciting for us because it means the trees. So that's great news because it means the trees in our forest today, they're going to be doing their job if they're protected. They're going to continue to do the job of sequestering carbon, producing oxygen, which we breathe, reducing air pollution. And those forests those roots allow that water to go back into the ground and not run off and pollute our waterways, but allow it to infiltrate. So another benefit of forest fragments, these forest fragments, which Ann Arbor has so blessed with, is increased human well-being. So they reduce stress, they reduce our heart rate, our blood pressure, they bolster mental health, reduce crime rates and violence, they promote healing, promote physical activity, promote social interaction, make cities more livable, and they make cities more beautiful. And it was interesting, the day Chris called me to ask if I would be willing to come and talk to you guys, I was driving back from the Arboretum to the Botanical Gardens. And as I'm taking the route, for this kind of back way route to get across the city, I was, as I often am, marveling and just amazed at how beautiful Ann Arbor is and how the forests really make the city. Like, I was thinking, God, these forests, this is amazing. What a place. And in my thinking that I made the logical jump to, this isn't by accident. This wasn't by accident that you have these forests here today. I lived in Lansing area before coming here, and before that, Chicago and Milwaukee. So I know what it's like to live in large urban areas that lack forests. And it's a whole different feel. I hardly ever came to Ann Arbor until I started working at the Botanical Gardens in Arboretum in 2014. And I just was amazed then, and I continue to be amazed at the amount of forest the feel of the city is completely different than an urban area, even though, you know, there's a lot of people living in Ann Arbor. It's a small city, but it's lots of people. It doesn't feel like it. It's just fantastic. And all of these aspects here are what these forest fragments are promoting. They're promoting human well-being, the connections that we have. You go for a hike, you're more likely to say hi to someone during the hike than you are walking down a city street, for sure, right? So they're critically important, and they serve as reservoirs of biodiversity. So they provide habitat for plants, fungi, lichen, mosses, animals, soil microbes, and many others. And this is a picture of the Nichols Arboretum in 2009. Now, I know exactly where this picture was taken, and it doesn't look anything like this today. The trees are still there, but the trilliums are gone. And I never would believe in a million years that this is Nichols Arboretum if I didn't know the person who took this. I've worked with that guy. It's the whole time I've been here, Jeff Blocky, and you know, there's no way I would, like, you would have to really convince me like this is the real deal. Yes, this, believe it or not, this was the Arboretum. It just blows me away because it's really hard to find a trillium, an adult trillium in flower today in that same forest. So forest fragmentation. So what does this mean? Again, breaking contiguous plots of forest into small parcels. And again, that impacts are cumulative. In other words, it's one at a time, but they add up to something bigger. 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. You know, it really impacts, and it's actually kind of exponential in its impacts. So forest fragments result in increased what ecologists call edge effects. So along the edges of these forests are really different environments than in the interior of the forest. And if it's a really small forest block, it's all edge. It doesn't have any interior. So there's differences in climatic differences from the edge to the interior, increased invasive species, increased edge numbers like edge species like deer, increased rates of songbird nest parasitism by cowbirds, increased levels of mesopredators and other like raccoons, increased songbird nest failure due to egg and nestling predation by mesopredators and other edge species, increased wind throw, and a lot of this results in species loss. So just loss of a species from a woodlot possibly because it's the species home range is bigger than the woodlot, or because specific habitat requirements, like say a salamander that requires a vernal pool, or a chorus frog that requires a vernal pool. And let's say that forest has one, but that portion of the vernal pool is lost, then those species can't exist there. And as at this time of year, as I move around my neighborhood and elsewhere, and I hear these frogs calling from these little ponds, I just hope and pray that those ponds, those vernal pools, will still be there in the future, and somebody won't come build a house on it, or build a garage, or expand, or whatever it might be. And those vernal pools will still be able to be maintained. The other loss of species is just simply the edge species, as illustrated up above, or I mentioned up above, with nest parasitism, deer, raccoons, and other species. They detrimentally impact species and cause species loss in these remaining forest fragments. So it's critically important to protect them, and when possible, to create greenways or connections between them. So in E.O. Wilson and MacArthur's Island Biogeography theory, they published this in '67, and it really, really kind of launched a huge area of research, and the forest fragmentation was part of that. All of that stuff I mentioned, there's lots of studies on each of that. And it was really spurred originally by MacArthur and Wilson in their Island Biogeography paper. So the take-home message here is that these isolated forest fragments, or any habitat fragment, if they're not connected to a bigger core area, if they're not connected to a big area through a corridor or something, they will lose species. So the more isolated they are, the more species, they'll just simply lose species. In other words, something will happen to that species of salamander over time, and boom, it's gone. If it can't replace itself, the corridors allow them to be replaced. So, and this was looking at islands, and then, in other words, islands next to a mainland or farther apart, or really isolated islands, And that's where the theory was developed. And it's been tested and tested both in islands and still being tested on islands. I just went to a talk last week about it in the islands off of Greece. But it's also looked at as forest fragments. So the smaller isolated preserves will lose species over time. And it's not because somebody did something, or well, maybe, but this is the process that was predicted, and it's what we see. It's what we see based on observations. Something hurricane comes through, and that species, and a species is lost. And if it's isolated and can't colonize, no one brings it there, then it's lost. And the reason I bring this up is this is critically important to understand as a theory when you're managing forest fragments. So there's a series of conservation design principles, conservation reserve design principles that's well established in the field of conservation biology. And I just want to highlight a couple of them. One is the bigger preserves, the bigger the better. It's better to have a bigger preserve than a bunch of small preserves. And if you're going to have a bunch of small preserves, it's better that they're closer together so that species can move between them. And if possible, it's even better if you can have some type of greenway, some type of connectivity between these preserves. That makes a huge difference in species' ability to migrate, and it helps then if a species does blink out in one preserve, it helps that same species from another preserve recolonize. The other thing is reserve shape. Areas that long linear corridors are fine when they're connecting larger core preserves, but as a preserve itself, it tends to be all edge. And so those edge effects tend to be more pronounced in long linear strips than in strips that are round in shape would be the best, square, but bigger they have some core areas. And lastly, but not least, buffer zones. In other words, having some type of natural area, if you've got a forest, if it's got some natural land next to it, it's much better than if it's just a hard edge of a subdivision, or worse, shopping center or something where there's just no habitat. Parking lots. So at least in Ann Arbor, you've got so many trees that subvert the residential where there's a high amount of trees. At least better, certainly much better than some big shopping mall next to one of these natural areas. So one of the things we deal with is invasive plants, and I'm sure many of you or all of you know lots about invasive plants and their detrimental impact on ecosystems. But what you might not be quite aware of, or maybe not as processed and thought long and hard about, is native plants and why they're so critical. Well, native plants co-evolve with a native animal species, with fungi and other taxa. And this process happened over millions of years. And so they provide these species with the critical food and habitat. Consequently, most species rely on native plants for their survival. That native plants make up the foundation of local food webs and structure local ecosystems, and many pollinators evolve to specialize on a single plant genus or family. It's bumblebee pollinating here, a zigzag goldenrod, or forest, very common forest herb in our natural areas in Ann Arbor, our forests in Ann Arbor. And goldenrods, they support over 135 caterpillar species and hundreds of pollinators in Ann Arbor, including many specialists that are dependent entirely on goldenrod pollen and nectar. So this is just one. Goldenrod is a genus Solidago. There's maybe about 8 to a dozen species of Solidago in the Ann Arbor area, and they're just so important. These native plants, the invasive plants. So, for example, purple loosestrife. Purple loosestrife is an invasive plant. Came over in 1800s. It's a wetland plant, and they've documented in Europe and Asia about 114 different species, and that's from the 1980s. It's probably more now that live on the plant, that use the plant, and 14 of those are host specific. In other words, they live their whole life on that purple loosestrife. We've only found 3 species in North America that feed on it. 3 species. So consequently, that species invades wetlands. It grows really fast, and it just takes over wetlands. Luckily for us, there's some long-term research, and they found they tested insects from Europe and Asia and found 3 beetles that are host specific, that don't migrate to other plants. And so they're European species insects, but they don't move on to our native species. They specialize and spend their time on purple loosestrife, and that has been a successful introduction of those species as a biological control agent. But if you look at native plants, you'll see if you look closely, their leaves are often full of holes, or they have some fungus on them. You look at a non-native plant, a honeysuckle, a buckthorn, and they're like perfect. They're like nobody's touching it. No wonder. So they've left these invasive plants, they've left their predators, they left their pathogens at home. They came here, they're happy as all get out, and they grow like crazy and expand like crazy. And while the native plants are dealing with this burden of 135 different species of caterpillars that are feeding on it. My God, how does it exist at all? Well, this is a battle that's been going on evolutionarily for literally millions of years. And it results in the insects changing their body shape to fit the flowers, and the flowers trying to attract different species or protect themselves through chemical means. But it's a battle that's going to continue going on. It really has created this diversity where the invasive plants it's like they can go hog wild here, and at the expense of our natives. Another keystone species that's impacting our woodlands are deer. So deer in high numbers really act as keystone species in that they disproportionately impact other species. And they do this through competition for limited resources like acorns, nuts, and wildflowers, altering habitat features that determine the distribution of other species. So they really can change a forest by eliminating seedlings of some species, opening up, completely changing the understory. I'm sure you've all seen these browse lines, reducing or eliminating herbaceous plants, and these have cascading effects. In other words, it propagates through the ecosystems, it propagates through the soils, plants, insects, birds, amphibians, mammals, and other organisms, ground nesting species. I showed you this forest. This is another picture from the same spot back in 2009. And this is that forest today. You can see a few trilliums here at the base of this tree. There's one here, there's a couple here, and there's a log here with a few of them. And other than that, this is one of Jacqueline Courteau's deer exclosures that she installed. It's 1 meter square deer exclosures. So huge difference, just massive, crazy difference in the forest. Like I said, I would not ever think that was from the same site. So deer are browsing common trillium at levels that prevent it from reproducing and that prevent it from being able to support pollinators. And what's really fascinating is if you look at this plot, you can see a couple trilliums, like here's one, here's one, here's one. They're not in flower, but there's a few there. But what you don't see are all these little stems. And Jacqueline is an expert on looking at deer browse because she did her dissertation, her PhD dissertation on this at the E.S. George Reserve in Washtenaw County. And so she's really been doing this for 20 some or more years, looking at deer browse versus small mammal browse and so on and so forth. And I just think it's crazy that all of these trilliums are here, but they're not here. In other words, they can't support pollinators. They're not going to live forever. You can't keep taking off the leaves of a plant and expect its roots to live forever, right? The roots are recharged through the photosynthetics, through the process of photosynthesis, generating those sugars that then feed the roots. So this, could it recover? Probably over time, but over a long period of time, it can recover. And this was amazing to me. So this is Jacqueline's work at the Arboretum. And she's looking at fencing trillium versus unfenced trillium. And in 3 years, it went from 2% to 45%. And there's this cutoff of 30% that's been used in the literature. If a species flowering is browsed to a level that's less than 30%, it really starts to decline. It's not sustainable. And if it's over 30%, it's sustainable. So that's what's been postulated in several studies. So you can see that in 3 years, it was able to rebound, which is super, super encouraging. That if we can reduce deer densities, if the land managers in Ann Arbor, I think that's you guys, those who are responsible for the health of our forests, whoever that is who's responsible for the health of our forests, if we can reduce deer densities, we may be able to recover the wildflowers. And Chris introduced me as a botanist, and I thank him for that, because I don't think of myself as a botanist. I think of myself as an ecologist, and who would love to be a good botanist. But I know that I am a good botanist because when I'm out with others, I typically know more plants than most people, because that's what I've used to interpret the landscape. It's if I see a plant, I can tell you what the soil type is often. I can tell you the pH of the soil. If I see particular groups of plants, I know what the soil is doing. And that's what I mean when I say ecology. My focus is on ecology. The plants are indicator species to me. And so I move around in the Ann Arbor area, and what I see, and it's not just Ann Arbor, I don't mean to single out Ann Arbor, it's much of southern Michigan, is forests that are just decimated by over-browsing. And if I did surveys for rare plants for 15 years, and I know right where to find it. If I see a big brush pile, blow down, a tree fall over, that's where I know I could find certain rare species, because that's the only place they're left, because they're browsed out everywhere. And it's just amazing. It's not just Ann Arbor. Deer abundance has just rocketed over the last couple decades. So the case of the missing oak seedlings. So browse levels on oak seedlings over 10 to 15% result in reproductive failure for oaks. In other words, the oaks can't regenerate when there's a certain level of browse. And this is data collected by Jacqueline Courteau again, and you can see that 15% line there, the 10 to 15% line of deer browse. And look at the levels of deer browse. It's unsustainable. And what does that mean? Well, it means songbirds like the eastern bluebird that rely on caterpillars to raise their young. Well, where do they get those caterpillars? Oaks support the most caterpillars of any other species, and high deer densities inhibit oak regeneration through repeated and concentrated browsing. She was looking at oaks that the seedlings were browsed over and over again over a 4 or 5 year period, and eventually they just died. They just couldn't handle it. The case of the missing wildflowers, songbirds like the great crested flycatcher depend on being able to forage 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise their young. As adults, moths and butterflies feed on the nectar of wildflowers, and high deer densities drastically reduce the number of native wildflowers, negatively impacting insects and birds. So here you see number of zigzag goldenrod. I showed you goldenrods support 135 species of the critters that this great crested flycatcher, and 96% of the other birds in North America require. Look at this. Fenced versus unfenced. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can recover our forests. Yes, we can. But we can't do it without reducing deer densities, because look at this. Like, there's wiped out. So if you're responsible for managing a block of forest, if you're habitat, then you need to take into consideration all the species. I love deer. Don't get me wrong. I love deer. I mean, my heart smiles when I see deer, but my heart also smiles when I see butterflies and caterpillars and birds and mammals, and we need all these critters. We just can't have one dominating the whole forest. So willow flycatcher is another species. Look at this, pollinators. Again, fenced versus unfenced. This is incredibly good news. This is incredibly good news. If we can reduce deer densities, we can increase the number of wildflowers. We can increase the number of wildflowers. And in doing so, we can provide habitat for the insects and food for the insects, and thereby provide food for the birds who require them. So the case of the missing pollinators and the case of the missing songbirds. So I mentioned earlier, we've had precipitous declines in insects, precipitous declines in birds, amphibians, reptiles, mammals across the globe. We're in an area, a time that's called the sixth greatest extinction. Sixth greatest mass extinction event on Earth. So I know that's a huge issue, and tropical rainforest and everywhere comes into play, but we can do what we can in our own backyard. And the case of the missing songbirds, well, we have about 95% of North American birds rely on a diet of insects to feed their young. Insects feed and shelter on native herbaceous woody plants. Only the native plants can provide insects with the food and habitat they need to survive. The invasive plants cannot do that. Only the native plants do that. High deer densities reduce the abundance and diversity of flowering plants and thereby reduce populations of insects, and bird populations decline as their insect prey becomes scarce. So in concluding, forest fragments in Ann Arbor forest are an invaluable resource for all of life. Preventing further forest fragmentation and forest loss will reap dividends for generations to come. Maintaining biodiversity in forest fragments requires active management. We cannot be passive, because if we're passive, the island biogeography theory predicts and is borne out through lots and lots of research that we'll lose species. This is simply, if we just put a fence around it, we'll lose species. So it requires active management, invasive species control. It requires prescribed fire. It requires managing our deer herd. And maintaining oaks is critically important because they sustain wildlife, and to do so will require reducing deer densities to allow the oak seedlings to grow above the reach of the deer. So reducing deer densities is also required to allow populations of native plants to rebound and resume their functional role of providing critical food and habitat resources to the animal community. So I want to thank you for your time, and I'm happy to engage in conversation if anybody would like to.
Well, thank you, Mr. Cost. We only have about 4 minutes for questions to keep on schedule. So please, okay, so Chris, your hand up is, and then Lisa Dish.
Okay, I'm curious if the speaker ever had a chance to have a conversation with Tanya Hilgendorf, who's the CEO of the local Humane Society. And if you haven't, I wonder what we'd have to do to get the two of you together. Because she has mounted a huge campaign against any kind of deer management.
I do not know who she is. It's the first time I've heard her name. I'd be happy to engage in a conversation with her.
It might be interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Lisa?
Thank you so much for this excellent presentation. So I think you do a wonderful job explaining to us how Jacqueline Courteau's studies help us understand the damage that deer are doing and the effects that exclosure have on forest health and biodiversity. So you've given us lots of evidence that deer are clearly dense deer populations are clearly a causal factor, but is it possible to quantify what counts as high levels of deer?
Yeah, a lot of studies, it's actually really a low number of deer, like 7 per square mile. I mean, it's really small, anything over that. I'm not an expert on I used to have those numbers better at my fingertips, and I should have considered looking that up again, but my memory was 7 to less than 15 deer per square mile. And so that was in the literature, it was like 7. And then the DNR was like, no, it's got to be higher. So it's really a small number. And you think about, what if we were all like trying to live off the land, all you and me and all the rest of us on this call? And, you know, like deer would be great, right? You'd love to have some deer meat, right? There wouldn't be a lot of deer. And there were a lot of people here. The populations of North America were like really, really high native before DeSoto in the 95%. Imagine being in New York City and reducing the population by 95%. That's what we saw. That's what we saw when you know, these Indian wars were happening. There were way more people previously. So
if you have sites for any of the research that offers those numbers, I'd be interested. And
numbers of deer, the deer density?
Yeah, because
okay,
that's one thing that we debate. And
Yeah,
it's helpful to have scholarly sites for that. Thank you so much.
I'll look that up. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Rita. You're up next.
Thank you. Michael, I just want to say that I appreciate very much your description of the carbon sequestration of large trees. That was probably the best description I've heard of what that means, how it happens. So just thanks.
Oh, good. Yeah. There's a great podcast on that with the guy who's an engineer. He goes through like really detailed how he figured it out. It was really amazing. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Are there any more questions? Chris Graham has his hand up. It's hiding behind a flower.
Thank you, Michael. It's not just about deer, though. Our native forest fragments are a spectacular component, let's call them. Our good fortune is that we had some steep slopes in Ann Arbor. We had places that were wet. We had a lot of microclimates, and some of those were fairly large areas. We had farmers who left their back 5 or 10 acres unplowed and unchanged to farms. We have a collection of native forest fragments in Ann Arbor that are really extensive and really quite special, but they're still fragments. And as Michael says, we really have to manage them. We have been managing the best ones on our parks. We've paid precious little attention to the rest of them. And I hope our committee can be bringing to you some changes to the code of the city to do a better job.
Thank you, Chris. Any other comments, questions? All right, well, thank you again, Mr. Cost. This is very enlightening, and it's going to be a great help to us as we, try to improve the natural features in town and try to connect, wildlife corridors as well, and do proper deer management.
Great. So, do I have Galen's? I don't know if I have Galen's email address. You wanted me to send the talk to him.
I'll get it to you, Michael.
Say that again.
I'll get it to you.
Oh, great. Thank you, Chris. All right. Thank you, Chris. And thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you, and wish you all the best of luck. Our forests depend on your ability to manage them. So thank you for doing what you do. It's a pleasure to be associated with you guys, and Ann Arbor is just an incredibly beautiful city. And it's not by accident. It's by direct, thoughtful people like yourselves taking time to do what you do. So thank you. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you, Michael.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, so let's move on. The next item on the agenda is unfinished business. So there's the resolution to begin discussion of the U of M housing resolution that was discussed last month. Let's see, Kathy, would you like to lead this discussion?
Yes, thank you. The resolution that's posted to the agenda was approved by the Energy Commission on March 8th. And I would just like to introduce this, that even though there are quite a few whereas clauses, the resolution seems to have grown considerably as more people look at it. the purpose of the resolution is really just to provide a policy direction and to ask elected leaders to provide some direction, really to provide policy leadership to staff members who have been discussing these topics with very limited results for many years. When I talk to planning staff, they have many ideas of where housing could be located on transit corridors in Northeast Ann Arbor. But even though the University of Michigan staff and the Ann Arbor City staff meet quarterly, there hasn't been really direction or incentive to do this. And so I believe there's considerable frustration among city staff, frustration among the students at the University of Michigan. And I can give you a couple of personal examples. I'm chair of the Friends of the Michigan League, and the custodians that are full-time that work at the Michigan League, some of them drive in from Detroit. And that is a major hardship, in my opinion. And it's actually a social justice issue. That people have to drive that far. And the other thing is, I was in the hospital for just a minor procedure a couple of weeks ago. And so I was asking the staff and the nurses where they live. And then one of them said, well, where do you live? And I said, oh, I live about 2 miles away. And she looked at me and she said, you must be very rich. So I thought that statement sort of summed up how many of the staff at the University of Michigan feel that you'd have to be very rich to live here. And so how can we change that dynamic and provide more housing? And I can repeat some of what's in the resolution, but if you've looked at it, it's pretty obvious that this is consistent with our A20 goals. It's consistent with the University of Michigan sustainability goals. And so I would appreciate support for this. And I understand if commissioners who are employed at the University of Michigan, if they feel some hesitancy to move forward because of a conflict with their employment, that's fine. I know that this is going to be a difficult ask, but I think that it is the right direction to take. And I believe that it will be possible in the long run. U of M is entering a new land planning phase. One of the regents, Ron Weiser, is the owner of McKinley property. McKinley provides affordable housing in other communities. And so this is something that McKinley is already familiar with. And I think that's about it for right now. If other people want to comment, I'll try to summarize at the end. Oh, other than I would like to remove the 5th whereas clause, which mentions 118 private companies have been launched by U of M. We don't know how many jobs have been created, and this resolution is scheduled to go to the Economic Development Corporation. And so if they want to add back some information about that, that would be fine. And also the 4th resolve clause, which mentions our lobbyists, we just need to strike the name of the lobbyist as we've changed lobbyists, and it's probably better not to have a specific company reference in this document anyway.
Okay, thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
A few things. There are 2 resolutions actually posted here for consideration. There's the workforce housing resolution that we discussed last month, but there's another one, which is environmental commission endorsement. I'm not sure how you would like to proceed on this, because one refers to the other. Galen, could you allow me to share my screen, and I can put up the resolution for people to look at while we're having a discussion.
Oh, okay, and then the second resolution, I would defer to Rita Mitchell to lead any discussion on that. That's really a formality and an option if we want to be that formal to have a resolution in support of the environmental commissions. I mean, the Energy Commission's version of the resolution.
Okay. Let's see. John, John, you have your hand up, and then Rita.
Sure, thanks. Appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I know several folks have been working hard on this. As I kind of read through where this is at right now, a couple of things kind of stand out to me that I would find it difficult to support that moving this forward. But perhaps, if we can there's a possibility to make some, revisions to it, I'll just share my ideas. I find the resolved clauses to be the ones about workforce housing to be very clear. So those, I'm fine with those. I'm struggling with the title where we say 2,000 units. Based on what data, what analysis? I know it's aspirational, but I think that is problematic. So if it's possible to rename it, that we're going to be to match the resolve clauses that we're going to resolve to begin discussions with U of M for net zero affordable sustainable workforce housing, I think that's great.
Just for clarification, so just strike the 2,000 units.
It's this. To match what's in the resolve clauses is the recommendation. We're going to start a conversation with U of M. We're asking, like you have in the resolve clauses, asking the city administrator to move it forward. To me, that's how I would approach this. And then the question I have about the resolve clauses, though, is the adding in of the student issue. To me, that's a important issue too, but it's I don't really see it connected to the workforce housing, and I think that maybe adds more to what we're trying to accomplish here. Then would be helpful. So my suggestion would be just to focus on starting the conversation with workforce housing between the university and the city.
I think that would be fine. I definitely agree that the scope of this resolution has grown and it needs to be pulled back. And I wasn't thinking so much about dorms. I was thinking about housing for graduate students. Many of them are also already employees of the university and then would qualify for this workforce housing due to their employment. So that would be fine with me. I don't know how other people feel.
Rita, you have your hand up.
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to explain the second resolution. I put it together just to give us something for process, because it seemed to me that the main resolution stands on its own, and this gave us an opportunity to, to either support it or not. So it's just there as a possible administrative process thing. We don't have to use it. Depends on how the group wants to go.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see. Ann Marson, you have your hand up.
Yes. In reading through this, I'm not terribly familiar with the issue. However, it wasn't clear to me what exactly it is we're asking of the university, other than entering into discussions. I'm wondering, like, when you say, I know 2,000 units of housing here, and I know we're maybe perhaps uncomfortable with that precise of a number. But are we asking the university to develop this themselves, or to provide land, or what's the scope of what we're asking the university?
It would be all of those options. And this resolution, even though it's grown to become quite prescriptive, the purpose of the resolution was to simply start a discussion among elected leaders at the University of Michigan, the regents, and the city council, as well as county elected officials, our state leaders, and our federal leaders as interested. Does that answer the question? I mean, it was really to provide policy direction, because the feedback that I've had from staff is that they know of many areas of land that would be ideal for workforce housing, but I don't want to say anything negative about the University of Michigan, but the University of Michigan is a huge organization that is very protective of its traditions, and it's very difficult for the university to change direction in any way. And so just the concept of providing workforce housing in itself is significant. So I think we should ask for the least amount, but it is about having a discussion.
I guess what wasn't clear about that was that the city staff feels like they see potential, except that the university owns that land that they feel like would be ideal for workforce housing?
Some of it is owned by the university, and so it would require cooperation with the university. There is other land along Plymouth Road that will probably be developed, private land, once we have a transit corridor along Plymouth Road that would provide that type of housing.
I see. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions at this point? Then I think it would be proper for us to entertain friendly amendments or suggested amendments. And but I'm unclear about how to proceed with which resolution. I think it's important that we've already discussed this one that I have displayed, and the Energy Commission has already discussed it and approved it. And I understand that the Planning Commission has discussed it, but that they have not. They have chosen not to endorse it. They have. Mostly because it's not part of their it's not on their plate right now, and they have many other issues to deal with. So my impression, and let me know if I'm wrong, Shannon, is that the Planning Commission will get engaged as soon as there's some kind of rubric or framework that's ongoing that presents something tangible that you can deal with. Shannon, you have the floor.
Yeah, and Lisa, please feel free to jump into here because you were part of that discussion as well.
Shannon, you're super hard to hear for me.
Okay, sorry. Is this any better? Let me check my audio settings. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So Lisa, please feel free to jump into because you were part of this discussion as well. We have a very ambitious set of a work plan in front of us that I think that we were hesitant to, because we really kind of taking this apart and looking at it deeply, we know would take several iterations of meetings and things like that. And we're kind of moving on some other things right now that we didn't want to derail for things that we felt like we actually have. We are certain that we have influence over, like parking standards and TC1 zoning and things like that we absolutely have jurisdiction over. And this is something that though I personally feel like it would be awesome if this were to happen. There's a certain amount we just don't know, if they'll engage. It takes two to tango, right? And so I don't think it was born out of, we don't support this, as much as we're already trucking in a different direction where we know we have influence, and we didn't want to kind of get off of that train to be able to take this on. So that's more, I would say, my impression of kind of where the group was going with it. And there certainly has been a lot of work. I think the Energy Commission especially has really poured a lot into this. And this has morphed significantly, since when it first came out. So I think that there's been, and they've incorporated, the feedback that we had, or whoever it was, from the times that we've had before. So it really is, I feel like, great that it's getting close for sure. I hope it goes somewhere. I guess is what I would say. But you have to try, right? So just kind of wringing our hands and saying, it's never going to work I think is important that we try. So it could be that there are other influences, and that there's just kind of a tipping point for all kinds of things that may make this have a more receptive time than other times, in the past. And it is just astounding how much the university owns in our city, right? Along some of these very important corridors. So, so I don't think it's like this is a bad idea as much as for Planning Commission, as much as that we feel like we have a slam dunk on some of the things that we have in front of us where we know we have jurisdiction, and that this one is it's totally supported in the comprehensive plan. Like almost all the things that are in here are just, you were referencing the A20 plan and all these other things, but it is all through the comprehensive plan too, in terms of the different things that you're talking about here. So it's absolutely supported by many planning documents that we already have too, so that also is important, I think, as well. So Lisa, anything from you that you remember beyond that? Okay.
Okay, Kathy, you have your hand up.
Yes, I have mentioned this to a few regents, and maybe they were just being polite, but no one has said this is a bad idea, this is not workable. There are ways to do this where there would be no cash flow impact for the University of Michigan initially, and there might actually be a positive cash flow over time. If the development is done by private companies on a 99-year lease of university land, then we would get property taxes from the building, just not from the land. I did mention it to the former president. I realize he's not here right now, but his comment back was, sounds like a win-win-win. So I know that's not communicated down to staff at this point, but if we could continue those conversations, and we used to have annual dinners with the regents, and because of COVID, we haven't done that. And hopefully we will be able to spring or summer, and at that point, this resolution then could be shared with them. Lunia is not here tonight, but she has been working on a press release showing support from the graduate students and central student government. I know that John Mirsky also is talking to some other leaders at the University of Michigan. So I know this is being televised, but I want to say this is definitely a hard sell. I realize that. But I think it will, if we can get enough people moving in the same direction. The University of Michigan is entering their planning process. We just have to remove as many obstacles as possible and make this sort of the easiest road to walk down.
Yeah, that seems hopeful to me. And then the other thing I think that is also important is some of their North Campus housing is really starting to age out at this moment, and so they have to make decisions about things. And yes, who knows, this could be coming at a good time that may have been different 10 years ago or something like that too. So,
okay. Yeah, I agree. And there is a statement in here about protecting the the trees, I don't know what exactly what the term was. Was something recommended by Rita?
Mhm.
You know, so that, yes, it's that high quality natural features. If you could go up just an inch or so. So we would take that into consideration. Another thing that that was brought to my attention is we really need a statement about ADA compliant buildings as a whereas clause. And so I was going to ask the
That goes without
disability.
saying, that goes without saying, Kathy. That's just like, you can't build anything without that anyway. So.
You think so?
Oh, no, I know so. Yeah, there's no way. you
Okay, I
can
mean,
do
that's
that
your
otherwise.
job.
So
Oh,
I
okay. Well,
wouldn't-
it was just a feeling that with all these whereas clauses, maybe that should be mentioned. But if
it's bound by law. You know, you have to do it anyway. It can't hurt just to have, more people as part of it. But yeah, that has to be done no matter what.
oh, okay. And does that law require a certain percentage of units?
It's more being able to get to places and things like that. But certain percentage, that's a good question. I'm not sure. And that it may be worth asking, that group to see. I don't know. Again, I feel like what this probably should be is more about beginning the dialogue than getting too prescriptive, about things. That would
I
be
agree.
my feeling.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I mean, my take on this is that the whereas clauses are good and that they outline different discussion points that are worth consideration when these discussions begin to happen. And I think as well, the resolve clauses here seem to be compatible with everything that's been discussed. So I don't have any personal problem with this myself. Rita, you have your hand up.
I just want to point out that with respect to the natural features, it fits really well with what Michael Coast told us today about the edges, the forest fragments. It's like those are the kind of places that I had in mind when we were discussing this last time, that to preserve those components.
Yeah, that should also be a discussion point, as this conversation evolves, with the university. So,
and wetlands is another area that we really don't need to mention because it is state law.
Okay. All right, Kathy. So let's see. Please raise your hand now if you'd like to have any more preliminary discussion about this resolution. I don't see any right now. So I think we should all remind ourselves that we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And it's very timely for us to be presenting this resolution to council because, of course, the university leadership is not in place yet, the new university leadership, and this is an opportunity to get this on the ground floor for consideration, especially because this is a long-time social problem here in Ann Arbor, social and infrastructure problem with all the new jobs that were created by the university principally and all the people that have to commute long distances in here. And this could only help both the city's carbon neutrality goals and the universities as well. So I think this is a longstanding problem that's been recognized by many people in the community, and that we need to do whatever we can to make sure that Debbie Diggle doesn't have to get involved eventually like she had to for the Galvin Plume. So, that's what I have to say right now. And I guess what we should do is entertain motions for friendly amendments. John Callowart just mentioned a few, so if you would just repeat those, and we can get those written down.
Sure.
John, you have the floor.
Yep. So sure. Let me just pull it back up. So what I'm suggesting is the title. Just say resolution to begin discussions with the University of Michigan for net zero affordable, sustainable workforce housing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do I have do you have any other amendments to propose, John?
Well, I'm kind of deferring a bit to Kathy here because I don't want to.
Okay, well,
I think the student piece is kind of beyond scope.
Yeah. Okay, well, well, yes, exactly. So we were discussing that as well. So do I have a motion to accept that friendly amendment? John's already, do I have a second? Kathy has seconded. If you accept this amendment, raise your hand or say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any no's? I hear and see none. Any abstentions? I hear and see none. So those amendments are passed unanimously. Are there any other friendly amendments that are proposed?
John, do you want to remove on additional student and so it's just employee residential units?
Yes.
In the
Thank
title,
you.
okay.
Yep.
So we'd be striking additional student and.
Yeah, I think it should just end at sustainable workforce housing.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's on campus or not, I mean, that's, again, I don't want to take it too far afield, but that's my opinion.
Okay, I'm not capable of modifying this copy that I have displayed. So Galen, would you keep track of that? Young Wen, you have your hand up. You have the floor.
I just have a question. What's the reason for striking out the additional student part again? Sorry, I missed that earlier.
I just think, for me, the topic of workforce housing is kind of big enough, is focused enough, and that when we bring in student housing, that's a whole other issue in terms of student enrollment. And I don't think talking about workforce housing and addressing student housing and enrollment at the university, it's, to me, it's going to pull it's going to dilute the conversation.
Yeah, but like, I think like below in the body paragraphs, you talk about how like Ann Arbor campus enrollment has increased a lot over the past. Wouldn't that just means like brought in the student conversation here though?
But what's the connection to workforce housing though from that?
No, I was just talking about like some whereas in the body paragraph.
Yeah, it's the third one down.
Yeah.
It's on the screen now.
I mean, are we saying that increasing student enrollment is pushing workers out of Ann Arbor? Maybe. How?
Because students are willing to pay more for off-campus housing, and that would then create more competition and possibly push lower paid staff out. But I'm willing to have this resolution focus on employees, given that many grad students are also employees.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you agree with that?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. Does that clarify for you, young one?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay.
Shannon, I just want to say we can always come back and address that issue, and I really think that having that student initiated resolution that we then support would make more sense. Mm-hmm. You know, if we just focus on workforce at this point.
Alrighty. Because as a student, like over the past couple of months, it was a bit challenging for me to find affordable housing too for next year. So like looking at this, I think like building affordable housing for students would be also really important. That was a point I wanted to make.
Oh, okay. I totally agree with you, and I'm willing to start working on that as soon as this one passes.
Cool.
And again, I really think it should be student initiated, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems prudent to me as well. And I think John had a very good idea to separate these two issues because it could complicate the discussion of workforce housing tremendously. Any other comments on this? Shannon, you had your hand up a while back. Okay, I guess there's no more comments. So with those friendly amendments, do I have a motion to vote on this as amended? Rita raised her hand. I guess that's a motion. Do I have a second? Kathy seconded. All right, let's proceed to a vote. Let's see, I got to stop sharing here so I can see everybody. All right, so let's see, all those who agree with accepting this resolution as amended, please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? I don't see or hear any nays. Any abstentions? I don't see any. So that's it. The resolution passes unanimously. So thank you, everybody. I know it's a complicated issue, but it's good to get this ball rolling as soon as possible. So what about the second resolution that was attached here, entitled Environmental Commission Endorsement? That seems to be moot at this point.
I think it is. Yeah. Just an issue of my own, thinking things through. It's okay to set it aside.
So do you want to advance a motion to table it at least, or remove it from the agenda?
I think I would just remove it from the agenda. I don't feel. I mean, unless the group thinks that's necessary. So I think we did what we needed to.
Okay, we should still vote on it. So do I have a second? Kathy's seconding this. All who agree to eliminate consideration of this resolution, raise your hand. Okay, aye. Any nays? I hear and see none. Any abstentions? I hear and see none. So that passes unanimously. We will not be considering this resolution at any time in the future then. So the next item on the agenda is reports from committees, other commissions, council, and chairs. So let's start off with the Natural Features Working Group.
We meet tomorrow at noon. Anyone wants a Zoom link that doesn't have one, we can get you one. Among other things on the agenda are looking at some of the first sections of amendments to the code, updating natural features. A key thing in that group is a revised and updated landmark and heritage tree list, much more comprehensive. We'll also be looking at chapter 40, which has been kind of a muddled and old ordinance, often amended, but a hot button at the moment because of people wanting to replace turf grass on their sidewalk buffer strips with other plantings. And so what are the limits and guidelines for doing that? So it's a right-of-way ordinance and what can happen and what shouldn't happen there. So there'll be discussion of that tomorrow as well, 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Pollinators?
Thanks. We, Pollinator Work Group, first off, did review the chapter 40. And we also talked with a transportation engineer, Cynthia Redinger of the city, about the height limits of plants and access to the right-of-way on sidewalks. So I feel that we are up to date in terms of her concerns. There may be some comments or alterations of our recommendations based on transportation, but I think that we have good guidelines that we can use as we move forward into the next thing that I want to talk about, which is the webinar we had this Tuesday evening on native plants and pollinators. We had great help from Galen in getting this organized and getting it out to neighborhood associations and other groups. Our registration was something like 80. We had attendance of at least 40, I think, close to that, live during the session. We had some great presenters from the County Master Rain Garden Program, Katie Wedachuk, Brad Smith, an art professor and dean from the art school, presented about his prairie backyard that he had installed, and it's beautiful. We had a presentation from Bob Hauser of Wild Ones, the national organization that supports native plants. And one of our climate ambassadors, Maddie Reif, presented on pollinators and the interactions of pollinators and native plants, which you heard a lot of in Michael Coast's presentation tonight. We are going to be offering some informal on-site consultations with people on doing some small plantings on their property, which on their immediate property and on their lawn extension areas, if they want to. We've had a few people respond already, and we have provided a survey to those who attended the session, and we're getting responses. So it was kind of fun, yeah, that's where we are.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. You have your hand up.
I want to thank Rita, and Chapter 40 is something that I've been interested in for over 2 decades, and I feel that Rita is really changing it from enforcement to encouragement and education, which is very important. And one of my main issues is the sight distance triangle area. So that's the area at an intersection. And the reason is that people, as they're coming up to an intersection, they tend to stop at the point where they can see down the street that's at 90 degrees. And if they can't see until after the crosswalk or in the middle of the crosswalk, that's where they stop. And in some cases, they haven't seen that pedestrian that's in the crosswalk or that's walking through there. And so it's really important that we have good sight distance, and we then enforce having people stop at the stop bar, not halfway through the crosswalk. So that's my soapbox for tonight.
All right, thanks, Kathy. So the next up is the Zero Waste Working Group. Lisa?
I was looking at John.
Okay.
Okay, John.
Happy to, yes. A lot of stuff going on, and we're very fortunate to have a kind of excellent crew working with us on this. So the core staff is myself, Lisa, and Jenny Petoskey of city staff. But then we have 2 interns, one working on metrics and another working on outreach. They're doing excellent work. Already some interesting stuff coming out of the metrics literature review that the intern is doing there, and helping us think about how to better capture things that we're already doing. So thinking about just like recycling rather than just the metric tons or the pounds that we're collecting, what is the value of the materials that we're collecting, and how is that contributing more towards a circular economy than just how many pounds or how many tons of something. And then we're also kind of really zeroing in on resiliency and equity as the other metrics that we really want to address, and kind of approaching in this primarily through a municipal or a county level lens rather than what a lot of the metrics that companies are looking at. So that's going well. Starting to capture some really neat stories from folks who are entrepreneurs and kind of leading circular economy efforts, and have been doing it kind of quietly on their own for decades, and wanting to raise that up in the community. And we're also working with CTN to produce some short videos about what's going on. And then we've got a group of C students who've really just kind of got through their first semester of putting their work together. They'll really start more focused work later in the fall as a part of their 1.5-year project. But we're hoping to keep a couple of them with us through the summer, working on the literature review and maybe getting some publications, or helping us kind of synthesize that work and also on the outreach efforts. We also had our first meeting with the state through I2P3, the initiative that we were selected for. I think we're there's 10 different communities across the state that are involved in this. We're the only one that's really focusing on circular economy, but lots of folks are very interested in it. So that'll be a platform for us to kind of share things. And we've got our fingers crossed that Monday we'll finally hear on the small metrics grant that we submitted last fall. It's been put forward for funding. That would be $10,000 to kind of add some more support to the work. But we don't know yet, but we've been waiting since September for that. So it's been a while. Yeah. I think that's it. Lisa, anything to add?
I guess the only thing that I would add is that with input from numerous staff members, Samuel McMullen and I have decided that the zero waste, the resolution to define zero waste and set goals, et cetera, will not go forward to City Council. We have heard loud and clear from staff that it's not helpful to have a resolution directing them to do something that they're already doing, and it's very much not helpful setting goals that they may not be able to make, as most other cities have not been able to make their zero waste goals. So I know that a lot of time went into developing the white paper that supports that resolution, and I hope that it doesn't feel like that time is wasted, because I think people learn things from doing that.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. It's remarkable progress. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to having this on the agenda for the main meeting when you're ready to present it to the full commission. Okay. So let's see. And on my part, I'll have to say, I haven't gotten anything done with the with construction and deconstruction, but I intend to get something started by May or June when staff has more time to help out with it or to be engaged with it. But meanwhile, I'm still recruiting people for the core group and gathering some information and finding allies in other communities here in Michigan. So let's see, and that's it for the committees and working groups. So the next item on the agenda are other commissions. Planning Commission, update from Shannon.
Yeah, we made some changes to the Unified Development Code, and some of which affected some landscaping things that has some kind of indirect relationship to this. One was on street trees, actually, and cleaning up some of that language in there, and making it a little bit more realistic in terms of how that's calculated, and then also rejiggering how this street tree escrow fund works, which was very complicated and sort of opaque, and working that all into the Unified Development Code in a more seamless way. So that was great to see some changes with that and making it easier. And we also focused a lot on what our coming work plan is, and I kind of hinted at that before. And the first thing we're really taking on hard is parking, and that relates to Environmental Commission too, believe it or not, because we're hoping to transition from having parking minimums, like you have to have this many parking spaces, to parking maximums. You can't do more than X amount of parking spaces. And all of that just gives people more, it encourages people to have less parking, less impervious surface, and to also encourage us to move forward towards taking transit more, getting out of our cars, and biking and walking and taking transit more. So, and then the TC1 zoning, I think, is going to continue to march down the line too, and we don't know the order, but the zones on consideration are Washtenaw, Stadium, and Plymouth. And then there's also talk of, other potential areas, but I would say that those are TC1 and parking are the ones that are really coming down the pike, and that we are very motivated to move on And we've been getting a lot of things accomplished. So I think we're on a roll with that stuff.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Shannon. So the next is Parks Advisory.
Hi.
Hey, Ann.
A lot of work been going on in the Parks Advisory Commission. I think first and foremost, we had two big retirements, Director of Parks and Natural Areas very recently. And so there's work going on to hire the replacements. I know one appointment has been made already, and that's Remy Long. I believe he's in the role of natural area preservation. There's going to be some work this summer on a park on the west side of Ann Arbor called Churchill Downs. It's partly kind of a natural, it's a city park, but it's got a lot of it's undeveloped currently. There's going to be some work to accommodate runoff, I think, from and wetlands. There's going to be kind of a pond, potentially ephemeral pond that's going to be constructed in there to hold stormwater runoff. So there'll be some activity in that park that will affect the natural area of it. We've done, the Parks Department continues, they recently repaved a big section of the Border to Border Trail that runs through the city. We just had a presentation on putting a little more attention into the gifts and memorials program that the park has and that the Parks Department has, and how we can make it a few more options for people and different price points to allow more people to be involved in making donations that are meaningful to the park system, which I think will be a really nice addition and opportunity for people to get involved in parks in other ways beyond just hanging out in our beautiful city parks. And also a new subcommittee has been formed also that's geared towards a bike recreation within the city. And, from the Parks Department standpoint, we're more focused on recreational aspects of bicycling, but a number of our trails do get used for things like commuting. And so I think that does have some bearing on the Environmental Commission. And so we're keeping an eye on. And that's about all I have.
Great. Well, thank you, Ann. That sounds great. So next up is Energy Commission. Edie, you have the floor.
Thank you. Last meeting, we first had a presentation of solar at city facilities and an overview of design and economics. And with a few minor amendments, we voted to pass a resolution in support of the use of ARPA, American Rescue Plan funds to support solar on city projects, and move forward with that in alignment of 820 goals. There is also another overview of the green rental housing program, which encompasses occupant weatherization, appliance efficiency pathways, and efficiency disclosure measures. And I believe this month there have been 2 public opportunities for comment as OSI seeks feedback on that program. There was a first reading of a resolution to support this program, and that will be considered at a future meeting. And we also adopted the workforce housing resolution.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Edie. So next up is Council. Anybody care to present a Council update? Kathy?
Well, I can say that the council's going to vote on the state and Eisenhower TC1 rezoning on April 4th. So that's exciting. Council will also vote on the plans, the initial plans, not a site plan yet, but the PUD rezoning for the Y lot. And that too is of interest to all of you because it's housing on top, literally on top of transit. So, not remembering anything else that's huge of environmental commission interest. I don't know, Kathy, do you remember? Does anything stick out to you?
No, and I
Oh,
apologize.
sustainable food. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We voted to approve the city moving forward with 5 short-term steps, one of which is already in process, and 1 long-term step to transition to more locally sourced and plant-based food options, not to take options away from anybody, but to recognize that, right now, if you want a plant-based food option in a city vending machine, you're probably going to end up with potato chips, which I suppose are plant-based in some respect, but so we can do better and it will be cheaper, especially if we locally source it. And so that's what we voted on that. And there's a beautiful set of recommendations that Dr. Stoltz wrote up in response to a resolution that Elizabeth Nelson brought to council in September. So that's a terrific project and I'm really happy to see that come to fruition.
Okay, thank you, Kathy and Lisa. So let's see, the next is the chair's report. I want to acknowledge that John Callowort's made some good suggestions to me about how to better manage our meetings so that, we can get our business done, to expedite getting our business done and have the meetings last for 2 hours, about 2 hours or so. So one is that I think I'm proposing that we reserve about 1 hour generally for presentations and new business. And then 1 hour for our generic items on our agenda, which so far we've managed to do this today. So I'm hoping we can continue this to be able to close out around 9 o'clock in respect to everybody else's time. And I just want to remind everybody to be mindful during the comment periods that keep your comments brief and to the point as much as possible. And that we always have the option to table or refer an item back to a working group, if we need to have a more extended discussion. And before bringing it up for a resolution or an ordinance draft or something like that for vote by the full commission. I also want to say on another topic, I'm reviving. Been really very happy to tell you that I think the water quality work group is going to be revived, and we've got a lot of energy behind that. And I've recruited a fair number of people, so I'm going to schedule a water quality working group meeting sometime before mid-April. And so I will be sending out an announcement when I'm ready, when I have the external people that are interested as well, people from staff, both at county and city level, and with the Huron River Watershed Council. So I expect these organizations will be participating in this work group as well. So look for my invitation to a working group meeting for a kickoff for that one. And then also I'd like to remind people that I've been trying to keep action points, but what I've decided to do is move it to the action item tracker. So there is an action item tracker that we've been using sporadically for the last couple of years. So I'm going to try to migrate that to a shared Google site so it makes it easier to share documents, because I personally and many other people on this commission do not have licenses for Microsoft Word. And so I think having a shared Google file system would be very useful to get our work done. So I'm going to migrate what I have, including the action item tracker, to Google webpage that will be shared to all members of the commission for both view and editing privileges. Okay, and then it should be open to the public for reviewing. So I'm going to set that all up myself in the next couple of days. And then I recently, a few days ago, maybe it was yesterday, I got an email from a city staff person about our policy agenda. Yeah, one of the items in our bylaws is that annually we're supposed to be proposing policy agendas to council. This regards suggestions for how to use the paid lobbyist for the city to good effect. And so the last time we submitted one was in December 2020, which was for the 2021. We did not get, we're a bit disorganized this year and we did not get this notice. It's expected by March 31st. We're supposed to get something to council. And I've reviewed the last submission and it seems like that we did for 2021 and it looks like it's, still germane for 2022. So I don't see anything novel to present there, but what I will do, and we don't have time to have a vote on this, before March 31st, but I'm going to send it out to all the commissioners so they can review it, make some comments, and we'll just stick with what's in the public record for 2021, unless there are some changes, and then I'll see what I can do about getting those added at a later time. Okay? I don't see any other way of dealing with this. So, are there any, let's see, any questions or comments about the reports? Then we'll move on to the report from staff. Galen, you have the floor.
All right, thank you. I got two updates. The Office of Sustainability and Innovations and U of M Trees, we are collaborating on a climate action movie night. And this is going to be held on April 15th at 7 p.m. At Arbor Field. We'll have a performance by Kai 5. Then after that performance, we'll jump into the movie. Then after the movie, we'll have a panel discussion. Then also Earth Day this year, we're working on that right now under leadership of Susan Westhoff and Leslie Science Nature Center. Earth Day is actually going to be celebrated by the city on April 24th at 1 p.m. at the Leslie Science and Nature Center. So this year, it'll be in person. Those are my two updates.
Okay, and when was the date for the Arbor Field event?
April 15th. That's a Friday. And it'll be outdoors. And then we encouraging everybody to bring blankets. You can do picnic style or whatnot, but it'll be a good event and a good collaboration between the city and U of M.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's wonderful. So, the other thing I noticed, Galen, is that the Green Fair has been scheduled, I think. The annual, it used to be called the Mayor's Green Fair.
Yes. I'm not sure of that date offhand, though.
I think it's in late April as well. Mm-hmm. But I will check with that. So I would encourage everybody to look at the city's website to find out when the Green Fair is coming on. And I think, for the last one was held in September, I believe it was, or it might have been around the 1st of October on Main Street. And we had a table for that event. And commissioners, a few of our commissioners, I attended that, and Chris Vandenbroek, Luna Oriole attended that as well, and I believe Yang Wen Zheng as well. And we had, I think it's a good opportunity for the commission, to be there to give residents an opportunity to ask questions of us and to see what kind of work we're doing. So I'm hoping to have a table for that, but I may be out of town myself, so I will be circulating other emails to try to find volunteers. And most of the table itself was donated by OSI, but I'll keep you all posted on that. Lisa, you have your hand raised.
Green Fair is Friday, June 10th from 6 to 9 p.m.
Well, that's right. It's June 10th. That's good. That gives us some more time. So, okay. So I got confused because I will be out of town then too.
And that's actually
out of town on April 24th, and I'll also be out of town on June 10th. So there. Right. Thank you, Galen. So in terms of action items, I don't think we have any to review at this time. So the next item on our agenda is items for the next agenda. Are there any topics people would like to discuss or put on the agenda? Let's see. Hopefully we might get some. So just email me your suggestions about what to schedule for our next meeting. We have a few others that are involved, but I think Tiffany was going to present the city's forestry plan, but she had to postpone that till April. So that's the only item I know of, which is currently on the agenda. Okay, for our April meeting. The next scheduled meeting is April. Let's see here. I think it is April 24th.
28th, I think.
Oh, you're right. Yep, it's April 28th. So the next scheduled meeting is April 28th at 7 p.m. So the next item on our agenda is public commentary. This is the second opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 1-888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 989-285-11637. This is an opportunity for you to speak for up to 3 minutes. So this information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and the video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. And be patient, there is a delay of up to 30 seconds before a connection is established. So do we have anybody on the line as yet, Galen?
There's no one on the line.
Okay, well, we'll wait 30 minutes and then we will adjourn.
You mean 30 seconds, right?
I mean 30 seconds. I've been on my computer. I've been on my computer since 6 o'clock this morning. I'm getting a little rattled. So,
while we wait, just want to make a minor correction. I technically didn't go to the mayor's fair last time, so I couldn't take credit for that.
oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
So yeah, you're good. Hopefully I make it this time.
Okay, great. That would be wonderful. So, let's see. I think 30 seconds have passed.
Oh, yes.
Is there anybody on the line?
There's no one on the line.
All right. Well, thank you, Galen. So I declare this meeting adjourned at 9:12. All right. Thank you, everybody. See you next month.